Good evening. Welcome to Insights, Newcastle University's Public Lectures programme. My name is Martin Farr. I'm co-chair of the Public Lectures Committee. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome you to the second of our autumn programme this evening. Could I ask you to ensure your phones are in silent mode? If you would like to tweet, we are at InsightsNCL, and you can hashtag the lecture with hashtag InsightsNCL. Not expecting a fire drill, so in the event of hearing the fire alarm, please join us in the car park outside. If I could draw your attention, please, to next week's events in our programme. On Tuesday, we have Professor Nicholas Money speaking about moulds, mushrooms and medicines at our usual 5:30 slot in here on Tuesday. On Wednesday, unusually a Wednesday event, the following day, the 16th, we have one of our Newcastle debates, which I hope is of great interest to our regular audience. Stronger Together, how can we build a North East safe for all? Newcastle debate in here at 6 o'clock rather than 5:30 on Wednesday rather than Tuesday or Thursday. My pleasure now to hand over to our chair for this evening, who will be feeding the questions as well, Professor Judith Rankin, who is Professor of Medicine, Maternal and Child Health, and Dean of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion here at Newcastle. Judith, please. Thank you very much.
Need the glasses. Thank you very much, Martin, and welcome everyone to this year's Black History Month lecture. As Martin said, I'm Judith Rankin, and it's my privilege to be the University's Dean of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's Black History Month lecture, which is organised annually by our Black History Month steering group. Ahead of introducing our speaker for tonight, I'd just like to say a few words about our Black History Month steering group. The steering group aims to maximise the promotion, enhancement and delivery of works that create impact towards the core values of social justice and equality, diversity and inclusion, with a special focus on Black History Month, which, as you know, occurs every October. The steering group is devoted to the pursuit of firm, positive changes against racial injustice. Newcastle University is highly committed to this challenge and strives to meet it in all aspects of our community. The steering group supports and sponsors a range of staff and student-led events, both during Black History Month, but also throughout the year. It is honoured to support this annual lecture, which has hosted speakers from a range of disciplines and sectors. Tonight, we are delighted and privileged to welcome Patrice Lawrence to Newcastle University. Patrice Lawrence, MBE, is writer and mentor and has been shortlisted for the Carnegie Award Costa Children's Award and won the Waterstones Prize for Older Children's Fiction, the Jalak Prize for Children's Books, the Little Rebels Award and the Crime Fest YA Award twice, among other awards. She is also Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. Patrice, I'd like to invite you to come up to give your talk, which is entitled From Black Squares to Full Circles, Did the 2020 Scramble for Black Writers Make a Difference? Thank you very much, Patrice.
Right, good evening. I'm Patrice, and this is Patrice. So this is me when I was about 9 years old. It was my school photo, believe it or not, before they brought in school uniform and ruined my life. And I was in my favourite place because I'm a nerd. So our school, primary school, was lucky enough to have a library, and I have an encyclopedia. Because I was one of those children who would always go, why? Why? I'm still the adult. It doesn't make you any more popular. But I had an encyclopedia, and I absolutely love stories. But when I look at this picture, can you see my hair? So I always had this bit of my hair. My mum called it my shield, because every day before school she would fight it to try and make it lie flat. And can I tell you, there was very little black hair product in Sussex when I was growing up, so there was a reason. My child, who's a born and bred Londoner, calls it my halo, which is much more generous. So, about 8 years ago, I was looking after somebody's cat in Whitstable, and writing a book. And I thought, do you know what? I'm going to be really healthy. I'm going to cook some fish. I'm going to put it on a grill. So I bought the fish, I put it on a grill, I leaned over the grill and thought, how does this grill work? Why press in the ignition button? The grill worked really well. I turned off the grill, I put out my smouldering halo, took a photo to send to my child so they can go, Mother, what have you done? And then I saw the cat. The cat was a black and white cat called Gizmo. And you can't obviously tell what a cat's thinking because of, fur. But if you could have read this cat's mind, it would be like, but Patrice, right, you're supposed to be looking after me, right? But you just set fire to your head. But then I thought, what if he went down by the harbour and he told all the cats about this woman who just flambéed her forehead? But then I thought, what if he actually wanted to message his mates? But he can't message his mates because he hasn't got thumbs. So what if there was a factory that made thumbs just for cats, and it was so popular that all the villain cats would come and buy their thumbs there, and that there would be a great big heist of cats with thumbs stealing things, and there is a reason behind the story. But part of it, the reason is I love stories. I love all types of stories. I love the ridiculousness in my head. But as a black writer, can I tell all those stories that I love? So, from black squares to full circles, did the 2020 scramble for black writers make a difference? I loved that title when I came up with it. Then I thought, what am I going to write about? What am I going to talk about? It's great having a title, but then I thought, do you know what? I'm in a university, so what do universities do? They define things. So, let me take you back to 2020, and honestly, none of us wants to go back to 2020, do we? And I remember looking at my Instagram and realizing that for some reason people had these black squares on their Instagram, and I'm usually way behind the curve, and I had no idea why that was. And then I found out it was meant to be Blackout Tuesday, and it was meant to be a space for black people to talk about Black Lives Matters and all the sort of things around anti-racism and anti-blackness. But all I saw was various people putting black squares on their Instagram and a lot of other people liking their black squares. And some of those people had their black squares. Let me just say their anti-racism education might not be fully up to date. So I was like, what is going on here? So I thought, I'll have a look and see what the origins were. And it was originally set up by two African-American women, Jamila Thomas and Diana Adjumang, and it was actually about the music business. And it was called, they set up a hashtag called The Show Must Be Paused. And what they talked about is how the music business makes a lot of money out of black labour and black exploitation. But that did not come to me on the South Coast. All I saw was people I don't particularly like putting black squares and getting lots of likes for it. So I just thought, what has happened since then? There was this conversation around, or another conversation, because I remember the Macpherson report into institutionalised racism when I first moved to London and worked in the voluntary sector, when it was a bit like I Am Spartacus, when every voluntary sector organisation, I am anti-racist, we've got institutionalised racism. And like 30 odd years later, it's like, what has changed? And bless my cynical heart, no, things might not have changed as much as I liked. So this happened, and there were conversations in publishing. There were lots of conversations between black writers, because obviously we have our own Whisper network. And I thought, at that time, suddenly a lot of publishers were trying to commission and attract and acquire work by black writers, but did they sustain a career? So that was kind of my sort of part of my conversation. And also, there were sort of lots of statements at that time, if you remember, by institutions online supporting Black Lives Matters, which was probably one of the best comedy moments I've ever had in my life. So, what do I mean by full circle? Has the representation of black children in British children's books peaked and stayed there, which is what I'm very interested in, and I'll come to why in a moment. But also, have the career opportunities for black children's writers in the UK peaked? Have they gone full circle? Or are we still ascending? And also, just a caveat, I put here in big letters, caveat. This is subjective. This is my opinion, because there's very limited research And also, publishing is incredibly secretive. So where there is information, it's rarely shared. So we kind of rely on our whisper networks. We rely on what we see, what we hear. So it is very subjective. So a lot of some of the research that I will mention has come from Mel Ramdashambold's book, Inclusive Young Adult Fiction, which is an e-book, authors of colour in the United Kingdom, where she interviewed, I think, 14 of us from different backgrounds to find out our experiences of being published. But there is this quote here, which I love, by acquainting readers with the glorious varieties of the human experience. Young adult literature invests young hearts and minds with tolerance, understanding, empathy, acceptance, compassion, kindness, and more. It civilises them. Strange choice of word, but let's skip over that. In short, and for that reason, I believe no other genre of literary form is as important. And sometimes in publishing, it does feel that there is a hierarchy. You've got literary fiction up there. You might have some genre fiction, as long as it's not like marketed to women, because that's right down here somewhere. And then over there, next to the wheelie bin, you've got children's fiction. And we're the people, though, not only do we encourage future readers, we encourage future writers as well, but we still don't often get that recognition. So, back to me again, it's all about me. So as I say, I rarely ever use notes, so this is kind of, I've been to academic conferences where people sort of stand and read from their notes, so you're kind of getting a hybrid today, of like the stand and read by notes and me wandering around sort of ad-libbing. Right, so back to me. I loved stories and I still love stories. I love stories that are ridiculous. I love wordplay. I love stories that tear out my heart and crochet them into granny squares. I love all sorts of stories. I want to write about feline gangsters, but can I? No, because I still feel that burden of representation. I still feel the books and stories that came to me when I was younger still affect what I want to write. So my pre-teens were mostly in 1970s in southern England, in Sussex. And the context of that, as well as books, is everything else you absorb, isn't it, that affects you. So for many of you who did not grow up in England in the 1970s, that is a majority of you, there was a programme on BBC One, when there were only 3 channels, and it was their top programme on Saturday afternoons, evenings, called the Black and White Minstrel Show. And what it involved was white men wearing blackface, singing show tunes and doing jazz hands. And it was on TV for 20 years. So if you imagine that's what BBC was like, and that's what the 70s was like, and those were the stereotypes that I absorbed, that was my place. And then the books I read, because I learned to read when I was quite young. I was privately fostered in a white working class family until I was 4. And my foster mum was incredibly aspirational for me. So she taught me to read when I was 3. We joined the library, and she filled my life with stories. And books have always had this sort of strange sort of push me, pull you effect on me. The stories pull me in, but it pushed me out of feeling that I could be a hero or I could be a writer. So does anybody else, randomly my age, remember this Cinderella? Because I love that book. It was like, is she going to wear a pink dress? I was always superficial. Is she going to wear a blue dress? Is she going to wear a yellow dress? I love the pictures, but from the early age, what it taught me is that to be valued, you had to be young, white, and blonde, because that was how it was repeated in every book that I read. Mary Poppins, I borrowed from my school library, and there's quite a few of them. There's a series of them, and I'm a bit of a completist sometimes. But I remember, and don't forget, I am very, very, very pre-internet. So I remember reading where Mary Poppins says a line like to the children, something like, if you don't behave, or you're going to be like a Hottentot. I had no idea what Hottentot was, but also had a feeling that it's not something I should ask my mother because she's got high blood pressure. And then very recently, like last year, I thought maybe I misremembered, and I looked it up, and actually it's a slur, isn't it? It's a sort of a racial slur for Africans. And there's all these little things that sort of that surprise you, but were very embedded in that literature. I loved it. I've got nothing to say about the Phoenix and the Carpet, except I loved it. And I loved the BBC adaptations that they used to have on Sundays, and that used to make me read the books. Because I didn't live with my mum for the first 4 years, the way we bonded was through books. She grew up in colonial Trinidad, so every book that she had white characters. So those are the books that I read too. And one of the books that she read aloud was Little Women, that I read. But then again, Jo wanted to be a writer, didn't she? And it was a kind of single-parent family, so I probably absorbed some of that with by osmosis. The Disney books. Even in 1970s England, Disney was still one of the sort of major sort of cultural events. So I had those books. I also had a soundtrack album of all the Disney songs, including Zippity Doo-Dah from Song of the South. Now, I've never seen Song of the South. Zippity Doo-Dah, as you may know, is a very sort of, catchy tune. And I thought, should I look up to see what Song of the South is about? Well, Song of the South is a mixed animated and real-life Disney film. I think it was made in 1946. It's a feel-good film about a 7-year-old white boy who visits his aunt's plantation and befriends an elderly sharecropper who sings Zippity Doo-Dah. There was a cultural commentator called Jason Spurb who describes it as one of Hollywood's most resiliently offensive racist texts. And James Baskett, who was the character who played Uncle Remus, couldn't actually go to the Atlanta premiere because of segregation. But hey, catchy tune. So all of this sort of racism and segregation was embedded in culture in the 1970s. Books, as we know, aren't separate, are they? They're part of our sort of consumption. And I consumed books, I consumed media. And what it continued to tell me is like people like me don't belong in books, they can't be writers. And there are also some terrible books around us, like Enid Blyton's Gollywogs were big at that time, everywhere. And I will say the word, there's Helen Benneman's Little Black Sambo book as well, which if you ever want to look up the cover, is a black child in a jungle with a bone through his hair or his nose. And for some reason, I had a copy of that. My mother did not buy it, but I remember she almost exploded when she saw it. I don't know. But that was like everywhere at the time. That was normality, and you absorbed that. Wind in the Willows. So my mum gave that to me when I was 6, and I struggled with the language. When I was 7, it's like, Mum, it's about a talking badger. Why am I reading this? And then when I was 8, I absolutely loved it. And I'm sure most of you have read it, but Mole at the beginning is doing his housework. It's sunny. He runs out. So relatable. Meets Rat. Rat's got his riverside apartment, they eat lots of picnic, another reason why I like the book, and they have adventures. But there's a bit where Mole gets homesick, and he wants to show Rat his apartment, and so his burrow, but he's scared, it's a bit shabby. So I lived in a cul-de-sac in Haywards Heath with my mum, my Trinidadian mum, my Italian stepdad. Loud. Great food, interesting music. A dog called Napoleon. Loud. And Mum and Angelo didn't marry until I was 9, and which was unusual then to have households where people weren't married. And so I didn't want to so I lived in a cul-de-sac where me and Mum were the only black people on the cul-de-sac, which people always think is going to be a hard luck story, but actually my neighbours are lovely. I went to school, we all went to the same school, in and out of each other's houses. But I was scared of asking friends round to my house because I thought we were a slightly weird house with the loud, unmarried parents and a dog called Napoleon and the interesting music. Sometimes loud Dean Martin, if you're into that sort of thing, and great food. But Wind in the Willows, the empathy that Rat shows to Mole, as a child, I absorbed that. And I thought, actually, if they're your friends, it doesn't matter. And my best friend has been my best friend since I was 5. And she came from quite a seemingly traditional house, her mum and dad and her sister. And I asked her quite recently why she used to come to my house. And she actually loved it because it was different. And now, let us discuss Dr. Dolittle. So, the original Dr. Dolittle books were written and illustrated by Hugh Lofting in, I think it was 1921, 22. And I borrowed them all from the library in Brighton. They are so racist. They're not, I'm not sure, I don't know, 5 out of 7, I don't know, I'm not sure. They are ravingly racist. So that Dr. Dolittle goes to Africa. We know that's not going to end well. And I remember always looking for, trying to see myself represented in some way that wasn't offensive. Well, Thank you, Dr. Doolittle. I remember seeing this picture I remember it so well, seeing this picture when I was about 6 of this king and queen of Africa trying to work out if they were human, if they were supposed to be like me or my family. And then to add to the insult, he gives them a son called Prince Bumpo. Nice one to you. And Prince Bumpo's backstory is that to get the princess, he has to bleach himself white. So for me to be in a book, it was either offensive or I had to be white. And I held that with me until I was in my 30s. I only wrote white characters because everything else in the world, including books, told me that I was lesser and that I did not deserve to be seen, and that the hierarchies of whiteness was at the top and I was somewhere there below. And that was in my stories as well. I was replicating that. So Verna Wilkins is an amazing woman who is from Grenada in the Caribbean. And her son once came home from school and he drew a picture of himself and painted himself white. And she said, oh no, we've done all this Black History work with you, what's happening? And basically she said, the son said, well, no, I've got to paint myself white because this picture's going in a book. And there are no pictures of Black children in books. So she set up an imprint called Tamarind, which was books for small children and primary school with diverse characters in. So, and then she said, the acceptance of white skin is associated with all that is important enough to be in books and pictures. And so school learning tends to be an unconscious rejection of the child's own colour. And certainly, even the curriculum now in secondary schools, the one that Blessed Michael Gove brought in and is still sustained, isn't necessarily, shall we say, anti-colonial, anti-racist, or particularly challenging. And also, can we just say that when you grew up in 1970s England, you learned a bit of offensive cultural appropriation along with your keywords. Oops. Oh, hang on. Just if you want to linger on that. I remember that book. I'm pretty sure I did it as well. We had it in primary school. I always think they look a bit like the Midwich Cuckoos, don't they? Thank you. But can I also say that it wasn't all bad? So when I was growing up, there was a program called Play School. And then when CBeebies came on, it was Balamory. And my really strong memories of watching Play School when I was at primary school and seeing like Floella Benjamin and Derek Griffiths, isn't it? Floella was from Trinidad, like my mum. Floella had hair like mine. She had beads. And sitting as that kid in Sussex and seeing her, I felt so seen. It felt so powerful. And then also, pre-internet, pre-Amazon, that time. You used to get book clubs in primary schools, and you'd get a little brochure, and you'd look at the books, and I'd go home to my mum, and was like, circle the book that we wanted, and pay the £2.99, because there was still like the netbook agreement then, and get the book. And there was a BBC programme called Kizzy, and so we got the book, which was a Didikoy by Ruma Godden, about a young woman of gypsy heritage who starts mainstream school, and she gets bullied because of who she is. So basically, it's about racism. And I had no words to articulate why things happened to me that didn't happen to my white friends in Sussex. But also, I didn't want the words, because once you named it, it hurt too much that that behaviour happened just because of who I was. But when I read that book, I thought, there is a name for it, and I felt seen, I felt validated. And as a writer, what that made me feel, that burden, which isn't a burden, which is a privilege of representation, is I can write books and stories where children can feel seen. Because things that hurt us, we sometimes lock away and we don't want to talk about. But to feel and read about yourself in a book, you can actually feel seen sometimes. So, I missed one? No. So let's talk a little bit about sort of representation, because I'm in a university, so I better do some research here. So has representation changed? Let's come back to sort of the recent few years. So Reflecting Realities is a report by the Centre for literacy in primary education. So they're always known as CLPE, and you have to think about what it's for. And they've done 6 reports annually now, where they've asked publishers British publishers to submit books with characters of colour in them, and they do a very sort of vigorous research analysis on quantity, quality, whether they're main characters, whether they're characters of agency, whether they're background characters, and also the sort of nuances of the characters at all. And I think what's incredibly shocking is that when they started in 2017, I think 4% of books featured racially minoritized main characters, and picture books, 6%. This is 2017. 6% of picture books that they looked at had characters of colour. The last report is 52%, and before that it was 61%, so it's gone straight up. That has absolutely changed. They also look at whether characters are not in a background, whether they're characters that aren't generic. I always describe characters that are coloured in sometimes, because sometimes you see with publishers, they must look at a book cover and think, kind of 3 white kids on there, just make one of them a bit brown. And though that character is a bit brown on the cover, there's nothing about brownness in the whole of the book. That's really annoying to me anyway, because when you don't see yourself, you're looking to grab anything. But now I'm a bit of a bolshy parent's like, nah, that won't do better than that. But 2000, when my child was born, my child is mixed heritage, and a Londoner, born and bred Londoner, and I thought London is different. And looking for books that reflected our family, there was still so few this millennium. And there's one that I found that had a cover with a brown child with curly hair, and my baby used to kiss that picture because they thought it was me. So even children are looking for that representation, and publishing has been so slow to sort of catch up with it. But what I would absolutely recommend is that you look up those reports. They're all online, they're all free, and they've all got quite a lot of data in them. But also what I just have to say is when the first report came out, Farah was invited to speak on Front Row on Radio 4, and I was invited with her because, hey, diversity. But what she said to me was that she got death threats when that was first published, because challenging the status quo, talking about racism in public places does incite that kind of very violent, very offensive behaviour, which actually can be quite frightening. But so in all, the number of the representation has improved, but they still question the quality. It's not always good. There was another report that came out, I think last month or early this month, from an organisation called Inclusive Books for Children, and their report is called Excluded Voices. I was a bit cross because to get to the report I had to sign up to their mailing list. I'm like, don't do that. And their discussion is around the use of what they call own voices, about people writing about their own experience. They talked about how many books for children of colour are written or illustrated by white creatives. And I would genuinely say that I don't necessarily think that's always a bad thing. There's some fantastic writers like Anna McQueen, who's written books called Zeke, which are picture books, and also Jessica Spaniel that does board books like Clive is a Nurse. But I think what they have is a politics. They are passionate for change in different ways. So I think it's a very complicated conversation. And also you might get some black illustrators that are great at illustrating black children, but you look at the East Asian representation, like, are you kidding me? So it's a very complicated discussion around own voices. And also a lot of us have internalized racism as well. If you think about what I talked about representation, it's taken me a long time to step out of that and really understand the positivities of blackness and write and celebrate that some more. But they're very useful to look at those reports. So, can you spot the Patrice? So this was my secondary school. This was just like a third of the school photo celebrating I think the school has just turned 25 or something, so our head, Mr. Dressauer. And when I showed it to my child, they said, like, that's a Wednesday Addams there, isn't it? I thought, yeah, look at me, like, wouldn't you look like that as well? So, of course, I grew up being seen, but not feeling seen, if you understand what I mean. So I was obviously very obvious, but felt very unseen and not being able to articulate a lot of the times how I feel. And honestly, if you had the other two bits of it, it wouldn't look any different. It would still be me in there. And what I would have loved at that time would have been books for teenagers that could somehow articulate how I felt about the world. Oh, sorry. There's only 4 buttons and I still managed to press the wrong ones. But what that did for me as an outsider eventually, that paradox of being seen and unseen fueled my writing. And I feel reluctant quite often to talk about being an outsider as being a superpower, because actually it's horrible being an outsider. Quite often you want to be inside. But what you do know as an outsider, you know what the mainstream world is like because you live it every day, you navigate it every day. But you also know what it's like to be outside. So you're an observer. You look, you think, you ask questions. And these are some of the range of the books that I've written. So from picture books to primary school books to teenage books, I have no shame. Any age group, any sort of publisher, like, yeah, go and give them the money. But normally it's about, I want to write about things that I feel passionate about. So I started off writing young adult books. So Orange Boy was a book about a young man called Marlon, goes on a date with a girl. He's 16, go on a ghost train, comes out, she's dead. And I kind of wrote it just simply as a creative writing exercise. And I was like, And that's the book that won the prizes, but actually nobody wanted it initially in publishing. It went around all the publishers. Nobody wanted it because nobody knew what to do with a book that had a black boy as a main character. And then it found one editor who is absolutely amazing and now we're good friends, and who championed it through Hodder, which is why it did so well. I've written other books with other different types of characters. Picture books, Is That Your Mama? I quite often say in schools to children, don't cross a writer because you will end up in a book. So when I had my child, and again in London, multi-ethnic London, I'd be in Sainsbury's in Islington, very specific that, but it would be Islington, that choosing my cereal, minding my own business, and strangers like tap me on the shoulder and go, is that your baby? It's like, no, I bought her in Super Drugs. Of course, it's my baby. I didn't say because I'm too well brought up. And then when my child started school, they'll go, is that your mum? No, I'm the kidnapper. I definitely didn't say because of like safeguarding reasons. And then they'll get, this is my child too. Are you Spanish? No, I'm not Spanish. Are you Colombian? No, I'm not Colombian. And the strangest one ever was, are you North Korean? So specific. I said, like, did you say yes, hon? But picture books are actually very transgressive. You can sneak things in because people often devalue picture books. And also, I think quite often as a society, we devalue young children. We sometimes forget that they are little human beings, and because they can't articulate how they feel and what they think doesn't mean they're not feeling it, and they have so little agency in their world. So, is that your mama? A little girl called Josie, her mum and her dad, and her brothers and sisters. I've got 2 brothers as well who are part Italian. We all look very, very different. Everything's fine at home, and until they go out, it's like, is that your mama? Is that your dad? Or is that your granddad? And I thought, how can you give a child agency when we're told adults are always right? Be polite to adults. So I thought, what can I do? So what she realises is that if the ice cream man says, when he gives her, her fab lolly or whatever, is that your mama? That she can say thank you for her ice cream and not answer and go about her business, because there is actually strength in silence. But we don't tell children that. And then a couple of middle grade books that are inspired by Jonathan Strong, who's a Black history character. And our story starts in Africa. The remit was, write a history of the African continent in 800 words for 4 to 6-year-olds. Hold my oat cappuccino. Luckily, a lot is done in illustration as well by Janessa Gonzalez, who's an African-American illustrator, and it's got a very big glossary. But what I learned about Africa as I was growing up again in the 1780s, one, not even that it was individual countries, but there was famine, there was corruption, that it needed Bob Geldof to save it with a soundtrack of the Cars. So you kind of learnt that, and that's embedded because there's nobody telling you different. And at school, what we learned was about enslavement, but it wasn't called enslavement, it was called slavery because nobody actually did the enslaving, they just happened to be, slaves. I was an adult when I learned about the scramble for Africa. I knew nothing about colonialism. It never occurred to me to think why many Ghanaian people speak English, because that's embedded in our system, we don't think about it. And what we can do in terms of representation and books is to actually change that narrative and get in there really, really early. So have the career opportunities for black children's writers in the UK peaked? So this is a quote from Stuart Hall taken from Mel Ramdashambold's book as well. And Stuart Hall is one of the few actual cultural commentators I can actually understand. So many have so many paradigms and hegemonies in them that I just do not understand a sentence, whereas Stuart Hall I can understand. So he says the cultural industries do have the power constantly to rework and reshape what they represent, and by repetition and selection to impose and implant such definitions of ourselves as fit more easily the descriptions of the dominant or preferred culture. That is what the concentration of cultural power, the means of cultural making in the hands of a few, actually means. He could be writing about publishing then. Publishing is very much about gatekeepers. Publishing decides who they will lift and who they will give money to, and it feels quite powerless. And because many children's publishers and the people who make decisions about children's children's books and publishing don't go into schools, don't meet young children. So they have this idealized version of what childhood is, and they forget children and young people are global and fantastic and have all these really diverse thought processes and a mixed community of friends, both in real life and online. But the books that quite often get lifted are the books that I would say are books that appeal to very traditional white middle-class demographics. So even if you are not that, those are the books that often, when we look at who gets the big launches, they had a launch where? When they look at who gets the billboards, it's not the working class writers and it's not writers of colour. So publishing is kind of, again, it's creating that market and it's kind of regurgitating quite often what's been there before. So this is some of the, in sort of Mel's reports. Oh, did I write that? Okay, I'll come back to that. Mel's report. These are some of the conclusions that she came to when she looked at UK writers of colour. So she said, authors of colour feeling tokenised or ghettoised. So this was published in 2019 and the research was a little bit before that. And what's actually very interesting is I never felt pressurised to write another book like Orange Boy, even though it did quite well. Then so many years later, my lovely editor said to me, actually 3 weeks ago when we were sipping rosé out by South Bank, she said, Patrice, actually publishers really did want you to write another Orange Boy, but I told them they are not going to do that. So there was a sense that once you get writing contemporary, diverse books, that they want the same. Secondly, the underrepresentation of gatekeepers from marginalised communities. So when I was first published by Hodder with Orange Boy, there was 2 other writers of colour who were on the list at the time. One's the poet John Agard, and one is Tara Matharu, who's a fantasy writer, and that was it. I was the only black woman on that list at that time. Now there are many, many more. I can actually name 3 black children's editors as well who commission stuff. But because people are black or of colour does not necessarily mean that they have a diverse outlook. A lot of publishing is still Oxbridge educated, so actually you still get certain points of reference that are the same regardless. And very shamefully, this is my shame, with gatekeepers I also think about PRs and the people who can support your work. So shamefully, when Granny Came Here Out There on the Empire Windrush came out, I was messaging a PR person at the publishers with a very sort of English name. And then when I met her, and it's a young black woman who was like, oh my days. And we actually went and we went to a festival and I was telling her that, and we could have conversations, even though I'm literally old enough to be her mother. Actually, I'm old enough to be most PR's mothers. But we could have conversations that I wouldn't have with the white PR because we came at things the same way. And I know that she will do whatever she can to promote my books. It makes such a difference when somebody relates to what you're writing. Feeling uncomfortable, anxious, or out of place in a literary community. How many times have I been to publishing events where there are more black and brown people serving a drink and food than actually in the who are writers? Actually went to one very famous white writer's launch in a house, and she's lovely, but literally I was the only person of colour who wasn't serving the food or drink, and that was in London. I still sort of joke about certain launches I go to, it's like, oh yeah, it's me. I don't feel uncomfortable or anxious because I grew up in Sussex, I'm used to it. But we are 2024. Why? How can we still be like this? And now I sometimes just don't go at all because I notice that I end up in more pictures than I should do, because I went to an event at Hatchards and there was Jeffrey Archer and there was Mary Beard. Hey, and there's me. Why is that then? So I don't want to be the poster girl for diversity anymore. One of the things she came up with, lack of quality, authentic representation for authors of colour when they were readers, which is what I was telling you about, but also for readers of the day, and how I was shaped by what I read that told me that people like me don't belong in books. Not enough backing, marketing once the author of colour's books have been published. We could go on for ages about that. I mean, the publishers' marketing budgets are very, very secretive. We don't know quite often how much we get allocated. But what we see now is, again, part of our Whisper network. We will see some writers that do get a lot. The majority of us, regardless of what our ethnicity are, don't get much. But the people who do get a lot are rarely people of black or brown heritage. Very rarely, and very, very rarely, I imagine, people from working class as well. Discrimination or unconscious bias in the publishing industry. One of the things that came out of the Black Squares debacle was the Black Writers Guild. So it was originally a letter, joint letter sent to newspapers from many black writers saying, really? Black Squares, statements, actually, we need fundamental change. We've been saying this for years. And the Black Writers Guild had a conference a couple of years ago, and there was two of the senior the directors of Hachette and of, I think, Penguin Random House. And a woman asked a question saying, can anybody here who was traditionally published ever had an experience around discrimination or racist or unconscious bias in the publishing industry? Put up your hand. And then they said, put your hand down if the publishers dealt with it. And most of us kept our hand up. And, you know, I've had experiences with a racial slur at a major festival and realised that publishers actually don't know quite what to do in spite of all their statements. And the most bizarre one I had was actually around Black History Month with a publisher who said that they purposely didn't promote my books in Black History Month because they know I didn't want to be known as a diverse author. I have no idea what that means. But also, my picture has been on posters for Black History Month, so I'm literally a poster girl for Black History Month, so I have no idea what that means. And then another one that publishers never talk about, low income. How can people afford to write? I don't get, you know, the high advances. I haven't got intergenerational wealth. I am my own safety net. And if many writers are not getting paid, how do we afford it? So lastly, I just want to say about what can change. And it's all about me. These are my opinions. So ideally, we dismantle publishing. We examine every process of bias, and we reassemble publishing as a glorious model of equity. Or we could do a bit of diversity here and like buy Boris Johnson's memoirs over there. Because that's publishing. It has this idea about diversity, but actually it chases the money, and those don't quite match. So what else can we do instead? Well, I think we look at the different elements of publishing. So let's look at agents first. If we can't get the information about marketing and advances from publishing, agents know. Agents know the differentiation between their different clients. Most agents that I know of are white and female and middle and upper class, mostly again because it's not particularly well paid. But also I know from experience that they can be excellent advocates for change, and they've really supported me, and I'd love them to do it collectively because they have that information. They know which of their clients get the money and which don't, and they could bring that together. Next thing, editors. Editors, to some degree, have so much power. So the agents send the manuscripts to the editors, and the editors decide which ones that they want to champion and hopefully go through to publication. But did you know that editors have no time to actually read submissions at work. They have to read those submissions and make those important decisions in their own time. So this is a quote from Barry Cunningham from Chicken House in a book I'm reading at the moment. And he says, I actually went to a freezing cold boarding school, so naturally I felt at home in Lucy Strange's remote island institution. So if editors have got so little time to read and reflect on books, so they will instantly champion the books that relate to them, the ones where there are common experience. And if, again, editors aren't diverse in all ways, then we will keep getting the same book. Editors have no training programs. It's kind of learning on the job. From the editors I've talked to, there's no sort of meetings with your manager, there's no career progression, so only certain people stay. Many of the editors I love have gone freelance or have left the business entirely because it is so difficult. But we should be preparing editors to have these difficult conversations around race and about representation, and not just random initiatives that actually don't change the structure as a whole. So the last thing, so only did 4, I could have done so many things here, is around reaching readerships. What I'm kind of tired of, and perhaps because it came from the Macpherson report as well, is people wringing their hands and saying, we've tried it, you know, but it doesn't work. Structural change could happen if you wanted it to happen. The one thing at the moment is, books by black and brown writers don't really sell. Maybe if they had a poster in the tube, maybe, you know, maybe you put money into marketing, they would sell. Maybe if you didn't rely on marketing through Amazon metadata or Waterstone's Book of the Month, maybe then more books would sell. And do you know what? Do you know what this month is, October? It's Black History Month. And you just thought, okay, this is an opportunity. This is free. This is when schools and institutions are Googling Black History Month. This is when you could sell your books. You could list all your books by black authors. I've got a friend who's an illustrator writer called Dape Adeola, who's British Nigerian, and I'm not on Twitter now. And he said he looked up all the Twitter feeds of all the major publishers to see if they've done like a list on Twitter of their black writers. He said there's nothing. I looked on the websites, the home pages. There's one that if you scroll down for like half a day, you find something about Mary Seacole, but there's nothing. Walked into Waterstones and publishers pay for like little illustrated board pictures of some of the books and tables. There's nothing. My friend went into Sainsbury's recently and they've done sort of displays of Black History Month in the past. There's nothing. So Black History Month, it's there, sitting there ready for you to flog your books by black writers. And there's nothing. So that talks to me a lot about this sort of momentum from 2020 that's no longer there. But I kind of want to finish on I must stop writing on like random sides of the paper. So firstly, I just want to say, I want to really finish on a positive note, because I'm lucky. I'm lucky that I do something that I absolutely adore. I'm lucky that I can go into schools and talk to children in a way that was never taught to me. I'm lucky that I get paid to lie for a living. But I'm lucky, I've worked in a bank, I've cleaned a psychiatric hospital, I've done all those jobs and I'm rubbish at them. And I'm lucky now that I can do something, because I think books can change the world. I absolutely, honestly do. So I think, as a conclusion, and it's a very short one, publishing as a sector, it won't push for wholesale change. It's a business. It will follow the money. If it wanted to change, it could have done it already. What you do get, though, is you get lots of independent publishers who are absolutely fantastic, and they are the risk takers, and they sort of promote those books and get those books into the hands of children, young people, librarians, families, carers, and in bookshops. And for me, people like me, I will continue, even though publishing winds me up a treat, as you may have gathered over the last 45 minutes, I'll continue to use it as a tool for trying for change, because I want the next generation of black children to feel better. I want it to be better, because actually my generation haven't done a good job yet. And the last thing is I just want to finish with a quote from Farah Sarouk, who wrote the Reflecting Realities Guide. And it's kind of, it just makes me think, okay, so about the power of books. And she says, in a most recent report, against the backdrop of recent times, books can contribute towards providing hope and what can often feel like hopeless times. literature can provide much needed affirmation, comfort, guidance, inspiration and empowerment. And when I read that, I thought, like, yeah, I'll just carry on writing. So thank you.